We begin too late. When America talks about voting, it usually begins at the voting booth. That is already too late. By the time a voter touches a ballot, law has shaped access. District maps have shaped representation. Media has shaped the story. Political parties have shaped the choices. Digital platforms have shaped attention. Family memory, public fear, and social status have shaped what the moment means. The ballot is visible. The structure around it is not. That hidden structure is the subject of the scaffolding of the American vote. The book asks a question American civics classes rarely ask: what systems shape the vote before it is cast, and what institutions decide whether participation becomes actual power? 2. The vote matters, and the vote is not enough. Let us be clear, the vote is not meaningless. Black people organized, taught, marched, registered, prayed, drove neighbors to the polls, faced violence, and sometimes died to make the franchise real. The 15th Amendment placed voting rights for black men into the Constitution in 1870. Yet states still used poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and intimidation to deny those rights. Nearly a century later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was required to confront practices that paper promises had not stopped. There is the lesson. A right written on paper is a commitment. A right protected by institutions is power. Africana Studies helps us see the difference because it does not isolate the individual from people, place, memory, institution, responsibility, and future. A black voter does not arrive at the polls empty-handed. That voter carries Reconstruction, Jim Crow, the freedom struggle, redistricting, school closures, church announcements, family warnings, and the discipline of communities that learned how to keep showing up when the system made showing up costly. 3. Black civic life is governance infrastructure. American political culture often treats black churches, schools, newspapers, women's clubs, mutual aid networks, and civic organizations as turnout machines. That description is too small. These institutions preserved memory. They created meeting space. They trained leaders. They distributed information. They protected people. They converted private injury into public strategy. National Park Service records show that black women organized political societies and met in local churches to plan the fight for voting rights. Black newspapers, schools, and colleges expanded their platforms for public action. That was not merely participation, that was governance. This book places those institutions back where they belong, not at the edge of democracy, but among the carriers that repeatedly pushed American democracy toward its own stated commitments. 4. What the scaffolding is. What the scaffolding is. Scaffolding is the hidden frame that shapes what can be built, who can enter, who receives support, and who carries the weight. It is not one politician, one party, one bad law, or one election. It is the layered system of law, race, status, memory, access, institutions, narrative, technology, fear, and power. Law establishes the formal rules. Access determines how costly participation becomes. Institutions administer the rules. Narrative tells the public what the outcome is supposed to mean. Technology filters what voters see. Fear converts perceived loss of status into political behavior. Power is the result. Who receives authority, protection, resources, and the benefit of the doubt. This is why institutional racism does not require every person inside an institution to announce racist intent. Structural racism can persist through the normal operation of rules, incentives, habits, and discretion that sustain inequitable conditions between racial groups. The system does not need everybody to carry the whole design. It only needs each institution to carry one beam and call that beam ordinary. 5. Ceremony versus power. The 2024 election demonstrates both sides of the argument. The Census Bureau estimated that 154 million citizens voted. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission reported more than 158 million counted ballots, with more than 70% cast in person and more than 98% of jurisdictions using systems that produced a paper ballot or auditable paper record. Those facts matter. Elections are not imaginary ceremonies, but counting ballots does not answer every democratic question. Who drew the district lines? Who decided where polling places would operate? Who managed voter lists? Who set the deadlines, identification rules, appeal processes, and language access? Who translated complicated institutional behavior into a 30-second headline? Who profited when fear traveled faster than correction? In 2026, official Florida sources posted a new congressional redistricting plan, while federal court decisions continued reshaping the legal standards surrounding vote dilution. The map is not background paperwork. The map helps decide what a community's votes are permitted to become. The election may be real, while equality inside the election remains contested. Two truths can sit at the same table. Democracy is grown enough to handle that conversation, or at least it ought to be. 6. The digital scaffolding. The modern voter also enters a digital structure. Algorithms rank information. Data systems segment audiences. Targeted messages deliver different political realities to different communities. Artificial intelligence can generate persuasive voices, images, and claims at enormous speed. Federal cybersecurity guidance warned that generative artificial intelligence would likely amplify existing risks to election infrastructure rather than create an entirely new category of danger. That distinction matters. Technology did not invent racial fear, status threat, voter suppression, or narrative manipulation. It can make them faster, cheaper, more personalized, and harder to trace. The algorithm is not outside politics. It is now one of the institutions through which politics reaches us. 7. A civic study method. The scaffolding of the American vote is designed to be read as more than an argument. It is a civic study tool. For every election story, ask 5 questions. First, what story is America telling about itself? Second, what structure is operating underneath that story? Third, who benefits from the gap between story and structure? Fourth, which institutions carry the pattern forward? Fifth, what becomes visible once the explanation changes? Then test the book's candidate patterns. Is this vote scaffolding, the shaping of political choice before the ballot? Is fear being used as governance? Is a complex structure being compressed into a safer story, such as it was only the economy? Is representation visible while authority remains somewhere else? These are candidate patterns, not magic words. They must be tested against evidence, repetition, institutional carriers, and observable consequence. Otherwise, we are just dressing opinions in a lab coat, and America already has enough of that. 8. What we need to do: start locally. Map the civic ecosystem around you. Identify the election office, county commission, school board, courts, party committees, local media, churches, neighborhood associations, civil rights organizations, libraries, colleges, and digital platforms that shape political knowledge and access. Do not ask only, who should I vote for? Ask, which institution writes the rule? Which institution administers the burden? Which institution explains the outcome? Which organization preserves community memory? Which institution can be moved before the next election? Build study circles that connect elders, students, parents, teachers, organizers, and local officials. Teach young people how to read a district map, verify a claim, locate a public meeting, follow a budget, identify an institutional carrier, and distinguish representation from authority. Voting is an act. Civic power is a practice. 9. What is unseen? What is unseen is that the visible election is the final ceremony of a much longer institutional process. Courts decide which protections survive. Legislatures write access into rules. Election offices convert rules into daily administration. Parties define the field of choice. Media organizations frame meaning. Platforms distribute attention and fear. Schools decide whether civic memory is taught or thinned. Churches, families, civic organizations, and community institutions decide whether people approach power alone or with organized memory. If those carriers remain unaccountable, elections will continue while public trust grows thinner. People may still vote, yet increasingly believe the vote cannot reach the institutions governing their lives. 10. Predictive trajectory, critical thought, and invitation. The predictive trajectory is not mysterious. If access, maps, information, law, and public memory remain controlled without meaningful accountability, political participation will continue, but the gap between ceremony and power will widen. If communities strengthen civic institutions, protect memory, teach structural literacy, and organize beyond election season, the vote can become more than a ritual of hope. It can become one instrument inside a larger practice of democratic power. Critical thought requires us to hold two truths at once. The ballot is precious. The ballot is insufficient by itself. The Scaffolding of the American Vote was written for readers ready to move beyond candidates and news cycles, to see the design beneath American political life. Read it alone, study it with your family, use it in a church group, classroom, civic organization, book club, or freedom school. Do not purchase this book merely to agree with it. Purchase it to test its claims, challenge its evidence, identify the institutions carrying the structure, and decide what your community must build next. The vote is the visible act. Power is the structure that decides what that act is allowed to become. Get The Scaffolding of the American Vote by Nathaniel Steele, published by Truthlens Analysis, LLC. Then bring the book to the table and bring somebody else with you.